Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Our featured guest today is Sharon Sayler, who is an international communications trainer, speaker, best-selling author, and CEO of the strategic communications firm Competitive Edge Communications, a company devoted to teaching professionals around the world how to be courageous leaders using critical behavior relationship, leadership, and communication skills. Ms. Sayler is also a member of Dr. Marshall Goldsmith's stakeholder-centered coaching team. Ms. Sayler works with a wide range of clientele, private clients, executives, entrepreneurs, universities, corporations, and organizations such as Delta Airlines, Yale Graduate School of Management, Women's Executive Leadership Council, and the International Coaching Federation. As a published author of 7 books, her latest book, Mindfulness in Action, How to Create Peace Amidst the Chaos, reached the international Amazon bestseller list, while her book, What Your Body Says and How to Master the Message, Inspire, Influence, Build Trust, and Create Lasting Business Relationships, published by John Wiley & Sons, has been translated into 6 languages and is used in universities around the world. She's also the host of eWomen's Network Radio's popular podcast, Life Interrupted Radio, Helping You Thrive After the Unexpected, broadcast every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once you get to know Sharon like we have, you'll find her real passion is in discovering how the beliefs we hold and the choices we make create the life we have. Today, Sharon will be speaking on emotional manipulation, how you can avoid being manipulated emotionally at work and at home. Audience, welcome. Sharon, we're very happy to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here with both of you today.
Yes, Sharon, thank you so very much. And audience, you are in for a treat with Sharon. She is both an authority and an expert. So, Sharon, please tell our listeners what led you to the work that you are currently doing.
My own life journey, if I can be so blunt about it. Growing up, I realized that there were a lot of things that I didn't understand, and I took at face value, and that's, as I entered adulthood, all of a sudden, I came crashing into a lot of beliefs I had that I thought were real, and then as you learn the lessons of life, both professionally and personally, you begin to go, something's not working here. So what started me on this was a whole journey to transform the way that I related to the world so I could better understand what was going on out there in the world. And I'm also a lifelong learner. I am just, as my friends say, irrationally passionate about learning and discovering new things. So I guess mostly my personality.
So Sharon, thank you for that explanation, especially about being a lifelong learner.
That resonates so much with both of us, Sharon. I just really enjoyed listening to that because I think it's also our lived experience. Can you explain to our audience what you mean by the term emotional manipulation? Could you tell our audience how that plays out in everyday life situations?
Oh, it's very common, and I get a little irrationally passionate on this subject too, so I'm glad you brought that up because emotional manipulation is all about control and power. And usually it stems from someone not feeling safe, and so they react in the opposite way, and that's like needing to grab control, grab power. And healthy relationships are based, as you guys know and talk about all the time, trust and mutual respect and the feeling of safety and security, not the opposite. And so when people feel like for some reason they're not being valued or they're not being loved, I'll say in air quotes, their way, oftentimes they act out in ways that are emotional manipulation. Now here, we need to make a real distinction between people that are pathologically emotional manipulative, such as narcissists, and people that have this as a survival mechanism. It's not that they're always emotionally manipulative, but it is definitely a go-to thing when they feel threatened. There are two types of emotional manipulation. The one that is more along the lines of narcissism, and this is the only way they operate in the world is, how can I manipulate people? How can I get what I want at all costs? Who cares about the other person? That needs extreme professional help. And the type of person that we'll talk about today is more of the one that when they feel hurt, they lash out, and it's not how they always are. It's just a really bad habit, a really bad set of belief patterns they have. And hopefully they're able to see that in themselves and be able to work on themselves to extinguish that behavior.
I get it. Thank you. Sharon, let me ask you something else about that then. I really appreciate the distinction, and I'm sure our audience does too, the difference between what's pathological and the difference between bad habits. Is this something taught? Where does one pick up the habits that they're not operating out of a survival mode of, needing to control some issue of the relationship? You mentioned bad habits, but does that have to do with how they're taught or learned or what they experienced in early life?
Well, both of them come out of our early life and our childhood, and that's how we've learned to operate in the world. It's how deeply ingrained is it, and whether we're also taught things such as empathy for other people. So we're talking about someone here who uses emotional manipulation, but also has the ability to step outside themselves, or at least at times can step outside themselves. If you were talking about the person that's pathological, based almost into the sociopath type of situation, those really are the ones I say run the other way, run fast.
Right.
Those need professional help, and most of us out here in the world are not skilled to take care of that, because those are the ones, both of them, we want to protect ourselves from, but knowing that sometimes we're in relationships where people, when they feel threatened, will pull out the emotional manipulation on us. I had a roommate at one time in my early years, college years, and they had this habit. It was a passive-aggressive thing that, to this day, I'm still unclear on it, but I know it was emotionally manipulative because I questioned my own sanity as it happened. Every time I would take a shower, they would turn on the washing machine.
That couldn't have been very comfortable.
Exactly. Well, in the old sort of college types of apartments you had, there was never enough water anyway, hot water anyway. And it was just one of those things, like, what is this about? And it was a very passive-aggressive move. So I say whenever you start to question your own sanity, somebody has a reaction or something like that, you're like, what is that about? You begin to go, okay, is this some sort of old pattern, old belief? Is this, what are they wanting me to do at this point? They're trying to do it in a very poor way, in a way that's not helpful to our relationship, that's not based on trust or respect. But what is this about? Because whenever you begin to question your own sanity, like I would get out of the shower just upset. And like, what? How come the laundry always has to be done in the 5 minutes I'm in the shower?
Right.
You're questioning your own sanity at that point. That's the kind of emotional manipulation that really is very common in relationships.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think many people can relate to that. Sharon, is there an easy way to know for sure whether you're being manipulated emotionally? Sometimes you may think, oh, it's just me. I just imagine that. And, one of the things, I remember a conversation with someone, because I was always obedient to my mother. If she said something, I said yes, and I never thought of doing anything differently or giving any kind of rebuttal. But we were very close on many things. But someone once said to me, well, it could be because you just have one parent. People with two parents, a lot of times children know what to ask mom and what to ask dad and who's going to give a yes and how they get to do it. So some children seem to learn very early this thing of playing people.
Oh, yes. These behaviors all start in childhood. And when we think about this idea of playing people, From a child's perspective, with the child's mind and a child's logic, it actually makes sense. It's about survival. How do I get what I want and need? And at the heart of it, that's what we use throughout our whole life. How do I get what I want and need? It's when we're unable to stop those childhood behaviors into adulthood that it becomes a problem. But when we think about it, some of the things that we see as adults are like someone who's emotionally manipulative will turn your words against you. They'll say things like, "It really bothers me when you don't do this," and if it's not like on your list to do, it's like, what? What's that about? Or you'll say something to them, and they'll say, "Oh, well, you always say that," or "You always," and it's always and never kinds of statements, and you're always the one to blame, even when maybe there's no blame at all. It's not them or you, it's just a situation. And that, you're like, as I said before, questioning your sanity. You're like, what's this about? And if you find yourself apologizing for a lot of things that have nothing to do with anything, like you didn't do it, then I question, is that emotional manipulation? If you're having to apologize to keep the peace, and you really go in your heart of hearts, this isn't really my need for apology here, that's emotional manipulation. If they say something and then they later deny they ever said it, there again you're kind of like, am I losing my memory? What's going on here? I swear they told me that. That's emotional manipulation when they start to do that, or they use guilt on you. Oh my goodness. I have a couple of, I'll say acquaintances, because once you learn that you make relationships with people and you begin to see the patterns, I always suggest, and when you begin to see some of these patterns, move them out into the further levels of acquaintance, because we don't want them in our inner circle. All of this kind of stuff is just very crazy making, and it just becomes a contagion and contaminates the whole relationship, and not just the relationship between you and that person. If you start questioning your own sanity and changing your behavior for one person, it changes in all of your relationships. It starts to change all your relationships. So it's really incumbent on you to start to notice the context and the patterns. And if someone is of that way and they are unwilling to be self-reflective, unwilling to see their parts in it, that's when you have to, as I always say, mosey on down the road and move them from friends to acquaintances.
I think that's an excellent strategy, Sharon. You're a genius. Really, just that. It brought a beautiful picture in my mind when you said move that person out to the outer circle. I've seen so many times people stay in a relationship or friendship or whatever the dynamic is, and it's not healthy. So definitely moving someone out further on the further rings of acquaintanceship, that's a really lovely strategy.
Well, we need to, because the interesting thing to note about that is people that are emotionally manipulative seek out the real trusting, the real sensitive, the really wonderful people, the real caring people, the real empathetic people. So those are all wonderful things to have, but they can also be sort of easily seen from a distance. And emotionally manipulative people seek out those people, and those are not weaknesses. Those are things that we want in truly loving, safe, mutual relationships. But those manipulators are so good at finding those sensitive people, those people who are trusting and empathetic. It's just like radar to them. And that's why when you begin to see the patterns, you're going, why am I always the one at fault here? Goodness, that just feels like a guilt trip. I feel like my energy is sucked out every time they walk into the room.
That speaks to me. It's so much of the work that you do with the nonverbal communication. When you said there's a vibe going on, the way the animal knows. The cat knows who's afraid of them, and they'll go and sit on that person's lap. Or the dog can tell someone's nervous, so he'll be aggressive.
Well, Sharon, I've been listening here. I just want to jump in. I want to thank you for addressing and calling this passive-aggressive behavior out for what it really is. I believe our listeners, and I know I have experienced the passive aggressive behaviors, this thing where yes means no and no means yes. When you were talking, it made me think of two things. One, when you mentioned the roommate who would use the washing machine when you were showering, in a recent edition of the Yale Alumni magazine, they were relating, asking people, I think the class secretary was asking people to send in stories of people who had used to flush the toilet when people were in the shower, and they were saying that problem had been corrected now in the dorms on the old campus. But what used to happen is that if you were in the shower and someone came in and flushed one of the toilets, the water would become so hot, it was scalding, literally, so people would just jump out of the shower stall and go, yow, right? So,
oh my God.
The thing is, from a pranking standpoint, that's like a funny thing, but from an insurance standpoint, you go, oh, wow, let's see, the person could have first or second degree burns, the person could jump out of the shower, slip and fall and crack their skull, or the person could get really angry and then be running through the dorm chasing somebody without any clothes. So that speaks to two elements here. There's the trickster element, but then there's also this element where I think some people don't seem to realize that doing certain things in a certain way elevates the risk of a bad outcome. One of the things, one of our favorite animated TV movies is Kung Fu Panda series. The hero of that is Po the Panda. He becomes the dragon warrior. But he is one of these people that you can't reason with. He's very simple-minded, and he does a lot of really bad things. And so the guy who's the master, who's named Shifu, he says when something goes wrong, he goes, this is not going to work out well. And I think that this passive-aggressive behavior that you mentioned, that many people would have experienced that and can relate to that. And so I think it's good to have a strategy for that. So, Sharon, I just want to launch into a slightly different angle, which is to ask you, since you're an expert on body language, can you give us some examples of the unintentional messages a person might be sending to other people through their gestures, through their tone of voice, or the way they are sitting or standing?
Oh, absolutely. I first wanted to say about the comment about the hot weather. Luckily for me, when you turned on the washer, it became freezing cold. So no third degree burn.
I can tell you hot is worse.
Oh, yes, that's what I was thinking too. I was thinking, oh my goodness, I was lucky it was freezing cold, not hot there. And the thing to watch for in this is patterns. Versus a trickster, we know the class clown, we know the practical joker, and it's up to you how close or distant you keep a relationship with someone that has that as their personalities. Passive-aggressive is a continual pattern and a disregard when you say stop that. A trickster is someone who will try it and then you either say it or give them, I'll say in air quotes, the look, a disgust. They know, like, okay, this person doesn't find this funny, I'll change my behavior. That's different than someone who's emotional and manipulative and a passive-aggressive, because there's a complete disregard for your well-being, or when you say, you know what, I don't think that kind of thing is funny. Let's find some other way. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they begin to question your sanity. And the pattern continues. Like with my roommate, the washing machine kept getting turned on and turned on and turned on. That's the pattern. And so that's where I say that's the difference between a trickster. Now, with your body language, you could be sending messages and not even knowing it. And some of the messages that you could be sending, as I said before, this type of emotional and manipulative person are able to spot the sensitive people just from a mile away. And some of the body language messages we send are unintended. And they're as simple as a slight tip up to your head to the left or the right, especially in females. Somewhat in males, but definitely in females. When we tip our head to the left or the right, which we often do when we listen, it's just a habit, a behavior that we've learned. It looks very submissive. Now, we may or may not be submissive. I'm not saying that we are submissive, but when we tip our head, especially when we listen, it's a behavior, and it says we're submissive. So that could be a red flag that the person is watching and saying, oh, I'm going to begin to test to see how submissive they are. They're giving me a signal of submission. Same as if we drop our chin. Some people sort of call that the introverted. We drop our chin and kind of talk down, or we cover our mouth when we talk. Any of those sorts of submissive types of movements really are that flag waving in front of the passive-aggressive person. They're going, let me continue to, as they say, guess and test and see how far I can get. Another thing is when we stand, keep both of your weight over your hip, both of your hips. Oftentimes, if we're standing for a long time, our back might get a little stiff or sore, and we'll tend to put weight on one hip or the other. Or as women, if we're in high heels, we'll cross our ankles because it actually relaxes one hip and that shifts the weight. But all of those messages say, I'm submissive, I'm in my little child mode right now, say little girl, little boy kinds of movements. And that's where people who are seeking out someone to have a passive-aggressive relationship with, they look for those.
Wow, Sharon. We could just spend the whole podcast on the things that you just said. I want to thank you for your view of the distinction between passive-aggressive behaviors and the trickster, because as you were talking, I was testing it against the tricksters that I know, and I think pretty much maybe 90% of the people that I thought of, the 5 or 6 characters who I would put in the trickster category, I said, oh, what Sharon is saying is really true here. However, the other 10%, maybe they fall into the pathological range, so that would be why the trickster thing, they fall into the unreasonable category. It's so clear from what you're saying, and I want to thank you, and I know that there are people in the audience that they've had that happen to them. We call it being sandbagged. You're in a situation, you think that you're going to the wedding, and then the next thing you know, they say, oh, let's stop here, and it's a Tupperware party. Right?
Absolutely. I always say, watch for the patterns. People will show you who they are. Too often we rationalize and sort of justify people's behaviors because, overall they're a nice person, or they've done nice things for us, or they've somehow, all you said, kind of wormed their way into our lives. And it's hard then to really put your foot down. But people always show you who they are and know the patterns. I love Byron Katie's work. She has 4 questions, and she uses it to really know what reality is. Because I know in our conversations before, I love our chats, private chats, we've talked about reality and that there is no one reality. The thing to know with Byron Katie's work, and I use it liberally, she talks about how do you know if something's true. But she has 4 questions that she always says. And the first one, is it true? That's a yes or no answer. And then the next one is, can you absolutely know if it's true? And that could take some more thought, like, well, and then that's where you bring in context, patterns of behavior, that type of thing is how I use her work. And then how do you react, what happens, and what, when you believe that, when you think about that, she always says when you believe that thought, because hers is about knowing the truth. But I take these 4 questions and use them about people's behaviors and people's patterns. And is it me and my reality, and why am I questioning my own sanity? Or how do I know that, this is a pattern and I need to move them from friend to acquaintance? Because so is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? How do I react? What happens? What do I start going through my mind? What do I believe when this happens? And then her final question is, what would you be without that thought? I always like to say, what would you be without that set of behaviors? What would you be without that pattern? What would you be without that friendship? Would you be more calm, more safe, more secure, more you, more free, whatever it is? That's when it's time to say, this probably isn't the best relationship for me.
Yes, and so I would agree wholeheartedly, and I know in my own life I call that the process of winnowing, and the metaphor or visual that I use is thinking of a rocket ship when it has to break gravity. And so gravity, breaking the Earth's gravity, if you think of that, the resistance before that happens, all the things that would have to drop off. So when the rocket takes off, it is, I don't know how tall a rocket is, but let's say it's 500 feet, and then by the time, in order to break gravity, it has to drop off those stages. If it does not drop off those stages, it will never break gravity. And so to me, breaking gravity represents true friendship, the experience of agape and other forms of love that are real. And as we know, Sharon, how rare that tends to be in the environment, because sometimes we could be friends with someone for years and not really know. And as someone said to me a while back, they said, well, Bob, you are complaining about this behavior or these behaviors that this person is exhibiting, but did you ever have a conversation with them about how they see your relationship, and do they place the same value on the relationship? And so that gave me a level of clarity, which, as you mentioned earlier, which was to move them not only to another level from friendship to acquaintanceship, but to actually sever the relationship. And to answer your last question, how do I feel afterwards? I feel like the woman in the Clairol commercial, which was, so that's how I feel. I feel great. So, Sharon, let me ask you this. On page 52 of your Mindfulness in Action book, you discuss how people can be in intimate love relationships. And I think this is really important to bring up because, many times in business, you could be in a meeting with someone, and if they're having problems in their personal life, it's affecting your ability to do business with them because they're not focused on that. If they're fighting with their spouse or this, what we call stuff going on, right,
Mm-hmm.
that it's important. So, and so the nub of my question is, you talk about in that section in your book how when someone is in a relationship where they are emotionally unavailable, and then I just thought of that in the context of what we were just talking about. You're in a friendship with someone, and they are emotionally unavailable. So can you just briefly tell the audience what you mean by that term and how to overcome the challenges that come along with when you're involved either with a friendship or especially, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or a spouse situation where the other party is emotionally unavailable?
Great question. And there is a big difference between being emotionally manipulative and emotionally unavailable. Emotionally unavailable people are not aware of their emotions. If you ask them, how do you feel, they might put some word on it that they've heard, but they don't even really know what the word means. They might feel, I don't know, I'm okay, or I feel sad, but they're not able to give you any more descriptors of it. They really are unable to, when something happens, as in the description that you were saying about your friend, or at the workplace, somebody's coming to it with a lack of focus. We've got to say the nuance between emotionally unavailable 100% of the time and just emotionally unavailable due to unfortunate circumstances at the time. So if someone's fighting with a loved one, lost a loved one, something like that, they can be momentarily, and moments can be long because grief is a process. Those could be momentarily emotionally unavailable people. But in the whole pattern of their life, in the whole context of their life, they're able to say for you as a friend or partner, when X happens, I feel Y. And they could say, when Z happens, I feel X. So they're able to really give voice to what's going on for them. A quick story was years ago. I was dating a person. It was about our fourth date, and I was sort of had the antenna up already, going, "This is probably the last date, right?" And he said to me, "Well, you need to be educated on this." And I immediately said to him, "I agree I am not the most versed on this subject, but no one needs to be educated. That really is not how relationships go. And he looked at me, and he was so emotionally unavailable that when I began to describe, when you say educated, it makes you feel. He looked at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. And that was my final red flag when I said, thank you very much, have a nice life. So be aware of those, that is it contextual, like their focus is somewhere else and so they're emotionally unavailable because of something that's happened, or is this how they are in their life? That's similar to emotional manipulative people, but emotionally unavailable, they're not truly seeking to manipulate you by being emotionally unavailable. They just don't really know what their emotions are, and they're not able to give voice that when something happens that hurts them, and they're not able to give voice and say, hey, look, you're my friend, you're my partner here, I'm hurt, I need to talk about this, I need to express this, I need some clarity. Where an emotionally manipulative person really doesn't care. It's like, yeah, I scored, I won.
So, Sharon, you really entered deep waters there, because your answer made me recall an Oprah Winfrey TV episode where Oprah has done such a great service by bringing up topics that, other people brought up, but because she had the visibility and I remember seeing this show, and the show that I'm talking about is where she had about 200 men on her show who had been abused as children. And one of the things that she did was she asked the men to stand, and they held up photos of themselves at the age that they were abused. So, like if they were altar boy or they were in the Boy Scouts or, some tragic thing. And the issue really was that where does a man go that, from a societal standpoint, there's a level of shame. A man might not even talk to his therapist, if he has one, about something that happened to him like that. Now they are an adult, and they're in a relationship, and they are emotionally unavailable. And as you said, they don't even know why. That the person that's in the relationship might be saying to them, honey, what's wrong? And so one of the things that came out in the show with Oprah was this was the first time for many of these men that they came clean and said, oh, I had this thing or this series of events that happened to me, and it affected me, it traumatized and changed my whole life, and that's why I couldn't talk to my wife or girlfriend. And there was a case where the woman came on that the husband was able to tell her right before he died. And then associated with that was Oprah Winfrey on that show. I believe it was the same show. I'm not sure. But I think she had on Peggy Lipton, which she talked about how she had been molested. And then Oprah talked about what happened to her. She said she was having Thanksgiving dinner all these years, and her uncle. So I'm saying that the emotional unavailability in terms of the causation, the person sometimes know. But this falls into what I call the existential grief area, where it's like just the person feels like they have a hole in their life. So I want to thank you for talking about that.
Oh, absolutely. And the one thing I believe both in our professional world and our private world that I talk to my clients about all the time is the basic thing that we all want is to feel safe. And there are times in our life when we were unable to be safe, as you mentioned about the terrible tragedies from the show, as other things as well. But if us as individuals take the time to examine ourselves and examine our roles that we're playing out for ourselves, examine what's going on for ourselves, and then come with an open heart to our partner. If our partner is not emotionally manipulative, but they're just needing a safe place, that is what is truly unconditional love to me, when you can come to your partner and you have a relationship where both of you know that it's a safe environment to work out any of those types of things. Now, sometimes the the grief process and the tragedies that have unfolded previous require professional help, and absolutely seek out qualified professional help. But if you have a partner or a friend in your world, like even your friend who asked you those great questions that caused you those moments of self-reflection, those are the kinds of people I always say surround yourself with. And whether it's in an intimate relationship or professional relationship, those sorts of people that feel safe enough to ask you those pointed questions, like, what are you thinking? Those are great questions. I'm sure we've all heard those. When they take you aside and go, let's examine what you're thinking here. Or in both our professional and our private world, those are the kinds of people we want to surround ourselves with. And then it's incumbent on us to be equally attuned to that relationship and make sure that we are making a safe environment for them as they are making for us.
Sharon, what you're saying is just so rich. As I've been listening to you and Bob, so many things come to mind. I think one very important thing that you mentioned that bears repeating to our audience is this aspect of, is it true? Are you telling the truth in this relationship? I know one of my own tendencies, in the past, and I'm giving it up more and more, I had a tendency to collect red flags. I would see something, and as you said, it's a repeated pattern, but somehow I just go happily along. Oh, they can't possibly, have any bad intention toward me. And, well, yes, they do. They've been doing this time and time again. It's time to, as you say, put them on the outer circle or leave. Relationships are a two-way street, and if you love yourself and have a certain standard, you'll ask yourself all these questions you've been mentioning and have a benchmark and say, this is not a person that I want to be in a close relationship with if I'm going to have to worry about these red flag issues.
And they could be more than just red flags. One was a person that I met at a workshop, and was one we were both attending, and we had some good times at the workshop. And sometimes at workshops, you begin to share things maybe at a deeper level quicker than you would. And ended up that we enjoyed each other's company and started having a tea once a week or a meal once a week. And after about 2 or 3 months, I noticed a couple of other friends would say things to me like, Sharon, you just seem to be kind of critical of everybody lately, or critical of things. And I always say pay attention to those red flags too, because I myself might not notice the red flag. But as I started to see the pattern of other friends saying to me, Sharon, are you okay? You seem to be pretty critical. So they're noticing a change in my pattern. I sat down and I started to examine that meal relationship, that tea relationship that was happening once a week. And I went, it's interesting. I didn't put those red flags of every time I have a meal with this person, the waiter or wait staff person is never fast enough, the food is never right. Everything was always critical at these meals. And that's when I began to notice I hadn't put the red flags that my behavior was changing and being contaminated. As I said, some of these behaviors are contagious. But it took my other friends to sort of wave a, are you okay, kind of red flag in front of me so I could examine where these behaviors were coming from.
Great, Sharon. Thank you for that. I'm sure that everybody in our listening audience can definitely relate to that. And that's an example of real friendship, when people can pull your coat, so to speak, and say, hey, listen, I noticed that the last 6 months you've been doing X or Y, and that, as you said, is everything okay, or is this voluntary change, or is this something you're not aware of? And so that's really helpful. So, as we move to wrapping up the show, Sharon, I want to ask you this question, because and I want to encourage listeners to get Sharon's book called Mindfulness and Action. On page 214 of that book, Sharon, I'm going to quote you where you say, and ask you this question: mindful living comes by detecting and eliminating limiting beliefs, disabling thoughts, those voices in your head that offer judgments, or the habit of labeling everything for their efficiency. Can you give our audience tips for ways to remember that there's no one reality, and how they can let go of their own hallucinations, conflicts, and confusion?
Oh, wow. That's a big question to end the show
Well,
with.
we can only offer you big questions, but, you can, like pie, you can put it in pizza-sized slices.
Well, from our private chat, I could expand on this forever. So, absolutely. There's so many ways. I say watch for patterns, watch for context. Give yourself and people the benefit of the doubt until the pattern becomes so obvious, If somebody's doing something once, that's not a pattern. Watch for the patterns. As far as our own self-hallucinations, be a lifelong learner. Begin to seek out new ways. Seek opposing views. I find people oftentimes only go with one view. And I say, you don't learn anything if you hang out with everybody that has the same view. Seek opposing viewpoints of whatever it is you're trying to seek out. If you're trying to learn, seek out. I'm a big fan of mentors. I'm a big fan of not having arguments, but seeking out opposing viewpoints and always filing it in that part of your memory going, isn't that interesting? Not judging it, not going, that's not right, it cannot be right, because there is no one reality. And the only way you can expand and grow as a human being and really create the life you want without all sorts of encumbrances, yeah, we all slip and, fall into these things on occasion, but it's how fast you recover. It's how fast you're able to get out and quit digging that hole, get out of the hole, and get on with your life. And that only comes from learning, exploring, discovery, creativity, being curious, and having an imagination.
Well, Sharon, that's great. I want to thank you for the interview. And again, the things that you say that bring up such a visual metaphor, I was thinking of people that play cards, bid whist or whist or rummy. And when you said about getting out of the hole, I go, that's why I don't play cards anymore, so that people don't go to Boston on me. So I want to thank you for being our featured guest today.
Sharon, thank you. Yes, we really had a wonderful time with you. Would you tell our listeners how they can contact you or learn more about you?
Oh, absolutely. My mindfulnessinactionbook.com is my website. And pop over there. I've got a free guided meditation as well as a wonderful book on courage and resilience. So it's mindfulnessinactionbook.com/courage if you want to get that free guided meditation and the wonderful book on courage and resilience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, audience, if you'd like to get in touch with Sharon, you can contact her at mindfulnessinactionbook.com, and you will be able to get her free gift, mindfulnessinactionbook.com/courage. We really want to thank you again, Sharon, for being on the show. We just had a wonderful time with you today.
Oh, me too. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Sharon, what final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
Oh, always be asking yourself the question, how do I know that?
Wow, that's really simple and succinct. So thank you so much for that, Sharon. So audience, I want to thank you for listening today, and I want to thank you again, Sharon Sayler, for being our featured guest. And I want to thank you, our listening audience, for listening wherever you are, in whatever time zone you are in right now. We welcome and look forward to receiving your comments about the show. Please let us know if there are guests that you'd like to see us have back on or topics you'd like us to cover again. Please contact us through our website with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us and learn how you can get control of your schedule, including easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. Again, that's 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress Free Now podcast show, and your first session is free. Call today to schedule your appointment. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.